Sera, 912 Saracen. Mr. Pallola, I wanted to follow up. I guess last council meeting we had talked about the Prevailing Wage Act. Did we eventually get a legal opinion on that?
I have not heard back from our solicitor, so no, I don't know unless Mr. Cerny has an answer.
Is my clock still running if I'm not talking?
No.
Don't mean to be rude, I'm sorry.
Maybe like a couple seconds.
Yeah, we've taken a look at it, and on the face of some of the statutes, you might be led to believe that prevailing wage would apply. But let me elaborate on that just a little bit, and again, not to take your time. This is a decision that will be made if at some point in the future there is a golf course developer who comes on board. The responsibility will be on that developer to put the budget together. And also in terms of specifically on this point, the obligation to make that determination will reside with that developer. The municipality is not going to give legal advice to entities with whom we go into contract. Their legal team will make decisions. There also are channels available to have conversation with the Department of Labor, which could impact this. There are also channels available for discussions with the appropriate labor organizations, which will have an impact on this. And to just issue a global statement at this point in time without having the underlying facts, without having the parties who will be engaged in this process, I'm just simply not prepared to do that. If I were to give you just a quick shotgun response, when you look at the statutes, it would appear that it would be. That's what the reading of the statute would say. But it's going to be fact sensitive, it's going to be party sensitive, it's going to be how they choose to engage that process.
All right, so the claim was still made by a city official, and I know this wasn't this was the recommendation of, I guess, the consultant, that the Prevailing Wage Act would not apply, therefore it would be advantageous to bring in an outside vendor. There is a possibility that Prevailing Wage Act could apply, and it would cost them just as much as it would cost them. Cost them just as much as it would cost us. There is the possibility. As you said, we're not in a position to give legal advice to a third party. That would be up to them.
That's what I said, yeah. I mean,
exactly. Okay, no, I just want to make sure that I understand it, because a lot of people are making a decision in this moment that it would be advantageous for an outsider to do it because they wouldn't have the same carrying costs as the city, and that's my only question.
Excuse me.
It seems misleading, that's all.
Well, hold on just 1 second.
Absolutely.
I did not address, what I addressed was the fact that if the city makes the improvements, it absolutely will have to do prevailing wage.
Sure.
I did not say anything in my letter as to whether because I did not get a response from our solicitor as to whether or not the contractor would have prevailing wage or not. I did not address that in my letter. I just basically said that the proposal that was given to us by Stephen Kay, and incidentally, as a golf course architect who has done RFPs for different municipally owned lands, basically told us that a private contractor would not come under prevailing wage. I also spoke with Matt Galvin on April the 21st, who also indicated that in his experience, they have not had to pay prevailing wage. But I did not state in my article that they would or would not have to pay prevailing wage. So I want to clarify that.
I guess then my follow-up question would be, it seemed like the price between the city doing it and a third-party vendor doing it was about $1 million more expensive for the city. So where would that cost difference come from?
Again, Mike Chirigian asked that exact question, and
Sure.
I told you that that was given to our committee by Stephen Kay, that prevailing wage would increase the cost by 1.5 times the cost.
Okay, so if prevailing wage applies, then the cost would be the same.
Correct.
Okay, I just think it's important for people to hear that number and understand it. Because a lot of people I've talked to in the community are under the understanding that someone outside can definitely do it cheaper, and we don't actually know that for a fact.
It would be up to that.
Well, I think the solicitor addressed how that would work.
Absolutely, he did a good job.
Again, my
explaining that.
information was garnered from information that our steering committee obtained from golf professionals.
Okay, and my questions came from the fact that it seemed unclear to me, and I wanted to make sure that I understood, that's all. I wanted to just make sure that I understood.
Did Mr. Cerny clarify for you?
As I said, he did a great job of clarifying the question for me, and it
Okay.
seems that my assessment was not too far off. The other question I had, too, is a lot of people I talked to in the community, there seems to be this big fear that the golf course is going to be sold off. I heard a number of elected officials say that there's no way that that can happen.
Correct.
Well,
Hang on a second. Let me ask my question. Now, I want to know if people are willing to put in writing and put specifically in the RFP that the golf course will remain an 18-hole golf course for the duration of the lease.
I would be the first one to sponsor that in the RFP, yes.
Thank you
and
very
may I-
much. How about the rest of council?
hold off on Vince's time. Vince, how many times do we have to say up here the reasons why that golf course will be a golf course, will not become anything but a golf course, and couldn't become anything but a golf course even if we wanted it to? How many times? Because every time somebody comes up there, after we've said it, I've said it 50 times, and people come up because they want to create the impression, Phil did it again tonight, talking about, well, there was a subdivision and then there was a proposal to do this. It's Green Acres protected. It's going to be a golf course. We want it to be a golf course. If we didn't want it to be a golf course, we couldn't change that. That's the bottom line. So please don't come up here with these cute little games like, will you put it in the RFP, will you put it in writing? Of course it's going to be in the RFP. It's an RFP to operate a golf course, not to do anything else. The person who gets it, if we go out to the RFP, is not going to own anything. They're going to be a tenant. They're going to be a tenant with the right to do one thing, and that's run a golf course.
So then it seems, Mr. Gluckery, that you would support having in the RFP that it would be specifically an 18-hole golf course.
That's, of course. Have I been saying that for the last year? Yes. So for you to come up here in April of 2014 and play this silly game like, and let's go back to the very beginning of the public discussion, when Phil and Andy convened a meeting of your club, the Republican Club, specifically to give people the misinformation that there was some movement afoot to somehow develop the golf course. And then we used the word develop for about the next 6 months. A lie from day one, a lie tonight. There.
Rick, I don't know if there's anybody else you want to insult before I interject something, but...
Well, how about the Catholic daughters?
Right. You know, your assessment is so self-serving, it's ridiculous. And once again, the meeting that we had, I don't remember you being there, Rick, was to talk about the golf course and the direction the golf course was in. Because as I remember the facts, Mr. Palilla had already started meeting with developers before the Golf Course Steering Committee was even formed. And I had a real problem with that. In fact, I have a problem with any council member meeting with a developer without other people there. And if I'm meeting with a developer, it's going to be with our city attorney. With that said, we needed to get the information out because guess what? We're here today, April 2014, careening toward an RFP. And the question I have is, what other options were looked at? Did the committee look at any other options? Or is the committee a committee looking at an option and trying to justify that option? There is no other option that has been discussed or even looked at by this particular steering committee. So, you can insult people all you want, call them liars or whatever you want to do, Rick, but the facts are the fact. We're here tonight with an RFP based on 1 year of revenue that is outside the trend line. It's not inside the trend line, it's outside the trend line. So we're careening toward this, we're rushing toward this, and maybe you'll get it done and you'll live with the consequences. But I have major concerns. I think other people do as well.
Right. Let me, Tony, do you want to respond?
Yes,
to the
yes, I do.
comment?
First of all, Mayor, when you say that I've met with developers, are you talking about golf course operators?
Did you not meet with people and talk about the golf course who are golf course owners and operators prior to that committee being formed?
I have met and I have spoken with 2 different golf course operators, okay, to see if there was an interest, okay, an interest. We don't have an RFP, so yeah, I did meet with golf course operators. That's part of my due diligence, Mayor.
Right.
And that is, and I've worked very, very hard on this committee. There was one other proposal that was made by Councilman Simpson, and that was for the city to bond it. So, well, I've always said there's 2 proposals that have been discussed. One is for the city to bond it, and one is to go out for a long-term lease.
Well, wait a minute, Phil. when we walked into the first meeting, now, when we do a first meeting, we should talk about ideas. You had two attorneys there trying to figure out how we can get around Green Acres so we can lease this thing for a long-term lease. You know, I'm behind the 8 ball as I walked into the door, Tony.
First of all,
you had two attorneys
first
there
of all,
figuring out how do you get around the Green Acres.
well, let me clarify something. I didn't have two attorneys there. We had a solicitor. The solicitor was asked a question because you keep alluding to I had two attorneys. Well, I don't retain attorneys, okay? This is the city solicitor, is the attorney for the city of Brigantine, okay?
Under your guidance.
Pardon me?
Under your guidance.
Under my guidance?
Yes.
So Fred Cerny's under my guidance.
Yep.
He's not under your guidance. He's not under the guidance of city
I'm
council.
sure. Yeah,
He's
I'm not
under-
talking about Fred Cerny directly, but
Well,
you
he's the
can get-
solicitor, so who are you talking about?
Well, you can get
Listen, if
anybody
you
you
want
want.
to get, if you want to get into that, okay?
Yeah, let's get into it.
We had a solicitor here for 20-plus years who was under somebody's guidance, and I don't know whose guidance that was.
I
but
wasn't here,
Why don't
Tony.
we just talk
I
about
wasn't
the
here, Tony,
facts?
but
Let's
I was
talk-
in that meeting.
Let's talk about the facts.
I was in that
The
meeting
fact
when
of the
we
matter-
turned around.
The fact of the matter
when
is
we
that...
turned around, I walked into the room, there's Fred Cerny and another person trying to figure out how we can get around a 24-year lease around Green
No,
Acres.
he wasn't trying to get around anything. He was trying to research the statute to see if we could go beyond the 5-year management contract that we have. And Mr. Cerny brought someone from his firm who specializes or who does that type of legal service, okay, and brought him in so that he could research it. Now, Fred, please, if I'm mistaken on what I'm saying here, I'd like you to clarify for the public that, number one, I'd like you to clarify the fact that whether you work for the city of Brigantine or whether you're under my guidance, because
Wow.
I really resent that. I think you should resent it as well. But were you there for guidance on the golf course committee and as to whether or not we could go out longer than 5 years?
Yeah, the issue on that point that day, as I recall it, was how long a lease, if you chose to... The issue on that point that day, as I recall it, was how long a lease, if you chose to... do a lease, could you utilize? There are New Jersey statutes that would suggest that when you're dealing with a management contract, you can only go out 5 years. Our firm in other communities has had the opportunity to work on in golf course areas, and there is a provision that if there are Green Acres funds involved in the property that is there, and if there is an effort to maintain the recreational aspect, that you can go out for, I believe it's 24 years. And the attorney that was with me that night or afternoon is an attorney who had worked on a similar project, who had done the research and had that information, and that's what that piece was.
And how do we get to that point, though? We were supposed to have a conversation and throw some ideas around, and I walk in, and Fred, you had your associate with you. How did we get to the point of the 24-year?
There is no
Somebody
doubt.
had to request that.
Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, the issue that had been presented to me at some point, and in all candor, I don't even remember who specifically it was, but there was a conversation, can we go beyond the 5 years? And, I mean, I had the resource to answer that question, and I brought the resource with me. That's all I
Right,
did.
but I'm just saying, when you start a committee, beside you, another attorney there, and the attorney's there for a specific reason, for a 24-year lease to get around Green Acres money, I think our mind's made up as I walk through the door.
And Councilman,
Not you.
No, Councilman.
Fred,
no,
and I
just one
apologize
thing.
if
No.
I accused
One
you,
thing.
or
No,
it
just-
wasn't that point.
One thing, if I may. I mean, I agree with you, it was a 24-year issue. But we were not trying to get around Green Acres. We were utilizing the Green Acres regulations that would have permitted the 24 years. We were not engaging in a legal analysis contrary to Green Acres, but within the regulations and making that information available to the committee. That's what we were doing.
Right, but we had to have some reason for that first meeting to
I mean,
happen,
obviously,
before the committee was even formed.
something was shared with me that caused me to bring Mr. Guest down.
Correct, that's all.
Right. I had from the dais prior to that committee indicated that I was interested in a long-term lease. And so, of course, that was the first order of
Tony,
business.
if we're going to both do something and throw some, ideas around, how about if I came up with a great idea? We wasted money on the attorney. So we should have came up with an idea in the beginning and then wrong Mr. Cerny's associate in. It was just premature.
Do you have a proposal? Do you have an alternate proposal, Mr. Simpson, Councilman Simpson?
Mr. What's your name?
Vince Sera.
Vince.
Thank
Oh,
you.
you
Appreciate that.
Yeah. He's standing up here. Let's get the public, and then
Sure.
we'll talk about it.
We're going to have a discussion of it at, believe it or not, this is just the beginning.
Right.
But just for the record, I was at that meeting that Councilman DeLucre spoke about, and his assessment was spot on accurate.
No, really?
Really?
Yeah, really.
Yes. I was at that meeting as well, and it was a spot-on assessment. Andy Simpson began the meeting with, he wants to talk about the golf course development and developers.
Well, aren't we talking about a
No,
golf
we're
course
not.
developer?
No, we're not.
Well, who are we talking about then?
We're talking about a long-term lease to a golf course operator. There's a difference between a developer and an operator. A developer implies that they're going to, as you would like it to imply, build houses there. But in fact, this is going to maintain it as a golf course and hopefully as a profit-making facility long-term for the city of Brigantine.
Well, Frank, I appreciate your comments, but I think at that earlier meeting, there wasn't a lot of information that was available other than...
The information that was available
Excuse
was
me, Frank,
given...
Frank, let me finish, and then you can go. There wasn't a lot of information available about where we were heading, but, once again, the issue is whether you want the golf course tied up for 24 years in the hands of an operator. Whether you want to call it an operator or developer, that's the issue. But the bigger issue for me is when you have a committee that already has a conclusion made, no other options were looked at, there's no document that we can turn to and say, here's a study that says if we did X, Y, and Z, this is what it will yield, and this is what it will yield if we do something else. That's the major problem I have with this whole process.
Phil,
Vince, you want to finish up?
24 years goes pretty fast. 24 years goes fast.
Yes, it does.
I think you've been mayor for almost 24 years. That's gone pretty fast.
Vince, can we move on?
Go ahead, Vince.
Sorry, I didn't mean to hold you guys up.
All right, folks, if we could settle down so that we could hear Vince summarize his comments, and then we can move on.
Sure. I find it interesting that I bring up a legitimate concern of people in the community. Regardless of where that fear comes from, it's still a legitimate fear. We sit here and we propose a government that's supposed to be open and transparent. I come here and I ask a legitimate question. I'm not trying to play games. What I'm doing is addressing a real fear of the community, and I find it interesting that I'm immediately attacked. If it's a position that you already agree with, then what is the big deal with putting the specific language in the RFP to declare it as an 18-hole golf
There is
course
no
for the life
problem.
of the lease? Hang on, let me finish. I don't understand what the big deal is. If you guys all already agree on this, then why not put it specifically in writing and put that rumor, that issue, that fear to bed forever?
There is no problem with doing it. The issue is that the fear is unfounded, and that's what we're trying to say through all of it. We can put that into the RFP. It's not a problem.
And from where does that fear come, Vince? Where do these rumors start? How are these rumors promulgated? How are they perpetuated? Not by anything I've ever said, not by anything any of the 5 Democratic council members have ever said or done.
Well, Rick,
So-
I'm sorry that I got the first ward, which is 90% of the, I'm not going to say numbers, is mostly on the golf course, and gave them an information seminar that night at my expense, not the city's expense, at my expense, and they came out with information, and you had the right. Lisa asked me if she could come, and I invited her. Mr. Palula came, and they had the right to speak up. Mrs. Phillips spoke up that night, and we had a conversation. It was all was is information, and if they came to me, the first ward told me, get rid of the golf course, I'd tell the mayor and the other 5 Democrats, I'd say, we have to get rid of the golf course. But you start calling me a liar, we're going to have problems, Rick.
Andy, I'll tell you what I said in case you didn't hear me before.
I heard you call me a liar.
Yeah. You guys had a meeting at which you, without checking with any of the people about whom you were to whom you're going to point the finger, without checking about what might be our real thoughts for the golf course and our real plans. Instead, you guys chose...
Who was that, though, Rick?
Every member of council, the 5 Democrats on council. You could have asked any one of us before you convened a public meeting.
I
I'm happy you did it at your expense.
First
and that's,
ward meeting.
Andy,
I'm the first ward.
I'm aware of that,
Republican,
Andy.
Democrat, Independents were invited.
Andy, that's fine, and it's good that you have a meeting to talk to people. But when you convene such a meeting and start by creating a fear that there's going to be development when you could easily have checked with any one of us and known
Rick,
that was not the case, that's the problem.
And I'm telling you right now that the idea of development may have been an interpretation, but it was not stated. The idea of the long-term lease, the idea that you're giving up control of the golf course, what was talked about. And people were very concerned about the way the golf course operates now and the way they use the golf course. Will they be able to keep that same type of use into the future? And I know when I spoke, I said, and I live on the golf course, I look out my back door every day, my back windows, there are people walking their dogs on the golf course, there are people who do all kids playing on the golf course. There are all kinds of things that go on the golf course. I made the comment, Rick, I don't know whether an operator will allow that to continue into the future. We got kids sledding on there. The city's been very good about the ancillary use of the golf course over the years. That's the comment I made, and whether we're ready to give it away for 24 years, whether the rates will be the same for the people who use it, which is about 30% of the golf that takes place on the golf course. Those comments were made. And the term developer was used, golf course developer, because quite frankly, I think that's what the term that I've heard interchangeable tonight, but no one said we're trying to sell the golf course at that meeting that I recall.
Which is never the point. The point was the use of the word developer, you know, is a loaded word. You know that in the context of the golf course discussions, of course, when people have in the back of their minds, because this is what they're being told or what's being implied, that there could be development, that in the past there was a proposal to do 200 homes, that there was this or that problem in the past, in that context, of course, people are going to hear about the golf course.
The 200 units were across the street on the land that couldn't be subdivided, that could never
wherever
be
it
built
is,
on.
built to this very day. Tonight, you did it again.
Well, it's
you talked
true.
about development, and you said, let's go back to 2002, let's talk about the old subdivision, the proposal to do this. Do you agree or don't you agree that right now that property is Green Acres protected?
I do.
And
However,
do you understand what that means?
I do, Rick. I have an understanding of that, but I also understand that there are ways to buy Green Acres credits back.
If the owner of the property approves it, we are the owner of the property, we will be the owner of the property.
Right, but let's be
I'm not
transparent
approving.
about that. Is it as ironclad as I would like? I think it's pretty ironclad. I'll be honest about that. I'll tell you that and that's the reason we did it the way we did it. But is it something that is that can never be broken in a lifetime? I don't know that. I think it would be very costly for someone to do that. But you know, when you're looking at the land mass that we have and the value of that land, I don't know that going into the future.
Well, if you want to throw that fear, that concern into the mix of things that we look at in deciding whether to go forward with an RFP, that's fine. I can tell you I give that 0 weight. I'm not concerned about it. And in fact, that would probably push me towards the RFP even more, because the likelihood of the city getting into a serious financial bind in the future, if it maintained operation and all responsibility for the costs and losses, if any, of the golf course, the likelihood that the city in that kind of a situation would turn to a desperate measure such as trying to find a way out of Green Acres or trying to buy off the Green Acres funding so that they could free some of the course for some of the use would be, to me, a lot more serious of risk. With a third-party operator who is in there and who has one permitted use only and who has no control over of the Green Acres aspect of it, cannot get the Green Acres release because that is entirely with us, you have an operator who can only run a golf course. Has been said too many times to count up here. When and if that operator is not able to make a go of it, it's on that operator. If the worst came to worst with a third-party operator, and whether it happened in year 2, 10, or 22, that operator would, like any other tenant, be subject to being removed as a tenant, would default presumably under the lease if they were not making payments or otherwise keeping up with their obligations on long-term lease, and the city owns the property and reverts to whatever position they want to have. Do they want to operate it, go to management company? The issue right now is really very simple. Phil, you keep talking about options. You know, at any time, you can present an option.
I did. I gave you 6 at the last meeting.
Yeah, well, the 6 actually boiled down to 2, and they're the same ones we've been talking about all along.
We haven't talked about any of them.
Well, we've been talking about it. The city runs it, or we look for a third party. And by default, if the third party, if we can't make a deal with a third party, or at least not on terms that are acceptable to us, the city continues to run it. So that part doesn't change. So I've never seen a downside to exploring a third party, and I listen as people come up. I want to hear somebody tell me, how would the things that matter to them change or be different under a long-term lease with a legitimate, because by definition, we're talking about legitimate third-party operators, and I'm not hearing that. And if I may...
we're probably not hearing it because we're talking too much. Vince, are you finished?
Vince, did that answer your question?
Well, I have a question for Mr. Sera when he's done.
All right, thank you.
You finished?
No, actually
Okay.
I'm not. I find it very interesting that we spend a lot of time arguing with this when we could simply solve the problem if we all agree on this by specifying in the RFP that it would be an 18-hole golf course. Like, why are we going to continue to argue about it? If every single member pledges and agrees that this has happened, wouldn't that
Vince, I think they're having trouble hearing.
I said if every single member here agrees that it's going to be an 18-hole golf course for the entire length of the lease, then why can't we just agree to put it specifically in writing in the RFP and just put the issue to rest? Why are we fighting over this?
Vince, you're
That's the
asking
first
for
thing I
something
said to you, Vince.
It was going to be part of any RFP. That's the nature of what we've been talking about. If you go to an RFP, it is an RFP to operate a golf course. So whatever particular language or sentences you use, that's in there. That's in the RFP. That's what they're doing. Or in
But
the
it'll
lease.
say an 18-hole golf course?
Right.
Because I think
Yeah,
one of the
that's
fears that
understood.
people have,
Well-
I think one of the fears that people have is that somehow it's going to be a 9-hole golf course and something's going to happen to the other 9.
Goes back to the same issues, the bigger issues that affect everything, which are Green Acres would prevent you from disposing of any portion of the golf course. And as a practical matter, as we've heard from golf professionals, both privately, those who have consulted with our committee, and from people who have come up who are in the golf industry and spoken, the golf course cannot function as a 9-hole course. They don't make it. Nobody's going to be interested in a 9-hole golf course. And in our lease, if we go to a lease with somebody, they're not going to have the right to say, again, whatever year, wherever they are in the lease term, they're not going to have the right to say, we're not making it as an 18-hole golf course, we're going to switch to a 9. Not an option. If they did that, that's a default. It will come back to the city.
All right, so like I said, it doesn't seem like there would be a problem then to just kind of put that in and go forward. That's the whole thing. I'm just trying to ask a legitimate question. It's funny how people just assume that I'm attacking the issue.
Please stop the persecution complex.
I asked a question.
Yeah, no, you do this all the time. People are being mean to you. No, what you're asking for, I think I've said, is part and parcel of the RFP, part and parcel of, included in any lease agreement that you have. So there's not any disagreement at all about that being something that the city dictates to a prospective operator. It's going to be in there. The things that we're fighting about here are quite different, which are, and you've touched on some of them, that there is misinformation, and I say, why is there misinformation? Not because of a lack of somebody up to this point saying, yes, we're going to put in writing in the RFP and in the lease that it will be a golf course. Because we've all said that in many, many, many different ways.
Well,
that's not the reason there's misinformation.
No, the reason there's misinformation is because this process has been, and I hate to use the term because I think we put a moratorium on it, less than transparent. And people are suspicious. There's a trust issue. And that's what I'm hearing in the community. Vince, anything else?
Yeah, actually, if I have time, I have 2, but I'll default to 1 if I don't. One of the things I'm actually really concerned about, I was reading an article about a golf course in Hartford, and went through the same issue, put it out to RFP, had a third-party management come in, and then the third-party management company itself was not putting, they actually had, I think, 3 golf courses. They weren't putting in the upgrades and money that they had promised as a part of their contract, and the city had a hard time enforcing this. So I want to know if there's something that we can put in place ahead of time, if there's some type of money or some type of bond to put this ahead of time, because what my fear is, say a corporation comes in, could be a legitimate company, LLC, And we've all had this experience, I think, or know somebody who had this experience with a builder. You have a builder who comes in, who does a job, you don't like the job, you file a lawsuit against them, you win, and then they file bankruptcy, and then you're kind of left holding the bag. I'm concerned that somebody could come in and do the same thing with the golf course, have an LLC, not keep up their share with it. We go in, we try to take legal action against them, and all of a sudden they just declare bankruptcy. So are we going to ask somebody to put money up ahead of time, some type of bond, so the citizens of Brigantine are protected against this type of default?
Vince, that very item was addressed when we met with Mr. Galvin about, putting up escrow money, but I'm not going to address it specifically because that's a legal matter that our legal team, along with whoever helps develop that RFP, will absolutely be addressed, because what we want with this RFP is to 100% protect the city from any of those issues.
So then, is it safe for me to assume that some type of escrow account will set up to protect
Vince,
people of Brigantine?
that's a legal question. I'm telling you that it was addressed in our meeting, and that our solicitor and whoever helps develop that RFP will make sure that the city is protected. Now, if you want to ask a specific legal question to our solicitor, you can do that.
I guess my follow-up question would be is, when will that information become available?
Once we develop the RFP.
All right. And then I guess my final question, and actually it was actually brought up by Ms. Phillips, and I think it's an important question to ask, and I didn't understand it. Is there a possibility that someone could come in, not pay any rent towards the golf course, and the city itself will be responsible for the bond payment until it was paid off? I didn't understand the answer that was given.
Well, I can answer that.
Sure.
This is going to be, if we go this direction, it's going to be a negotiation. You don't know how many prospective interested parties you're going to have, and you don't know what their position is going to be coming in as to what they're willing to offer versus what the city's looking for. Obviously, and this has been said a number of times as well, the city is going to look for the very best deal that we can get. And the very best deal would, at a minimum, I would think, be a break-even thing where we're not losing money. That said, you may not be able to strike that deal. And let's not forget, we owe that money. If we did nothing from this point forward, if we dropped the idea of an RFP right now, we owe the 400 or whatever thousand for each of the next 4 years. That we have to pay no matter what. If we can work a deal that recoups some or all of that through a third-party operator, we're certainly going to look to do that. But again, it's going to be a negotiation, and you don't know, we don't know until you get to that point, what's going to be on the table and what's going to be doable. So the answer is, and I know it was suggested by one or two of my colleagues, that would sort of be a make or break thing for them, and that's got to be a provision in there. Well, no, it doesn't. It doesn't, because we are already on the hook for that money. If we can work a deal that takes some of that pain from us, obviously I'm all in favor. If we can work a deal that takes all of it and generates positive revenue, even better. But it would be irresponsible now to say, this is our line in the sand, because you may very well be guaranteeing then the failure of the RFP process, and you may then, where even if you don't want to, be buying into continuing operation by the city, which, as we know, means the city is on the hook for all costs of the course.
But after 4 years, we wouldn't be responsible for the 400,000, correct?
Yeah, but after 4 years, Vince, we still would have the issues of, everybody acknowledges that there need to be capital improvements. And a little side note, the prevailing wage discussion is really irrelevant, because if the city is doing those improvements, we absolutely are bound by the prevailing wage. So the number, whatever that number was that Tony was talking about, that's our number. That if a private operator is able legally to do it for less, good for them. That should reflect any better offer to us. But the prevailing wage does apply to us. So we have a certain amount, and it's not a small amount, of capital improvements that we know need to be done. And then we have the other bigger issues, which are, and we've heard, and I know you're at most of the meetings, if not all of them, so you've heard professionals who know what they're talking about in the golf industry say among the trends that are out there now is the trend of consolidation, that the only successful operators, or virtually the only successful operators, are those who have multiple locations. Standalones aren't making it. A standalone, and we would be a standalone. A standalone is not going to have the marketing budget, it's not going to have the reach, it's not going to have the built-in customer base of golfers who use their other facilities that you can shuttle and interest and market your other facilities to. So, we would have that risk, and we would have, and this is the biggest point of all, I think, because we are a municipality. We get our money from the taxpayers. That's the only place. If the utility is generating enough on its own to be solvent, to cover whatever debt service we have, whether old debt service for a couple more years, or new debt service, or old and new debt service, and operating costs, and marketing costs, and whatever else, If the golf course were in a position to do that, that's great, then you're in the black. But we have to look tonight at the trends. And I understand, I've heard many, many times now, how the years 2012 and 2013, or at least a portion of that, is an anomaly because of Sandy. And to a certain extent, I'll agree with that. But the trend is still the trend. The trend has been downward for a number of years. We hear nothing encouraging about the golf course industry nationally. Mr. Palillo talked tonight, and he was quoting from reputable sources, as far as I could tell, about trends in the golfing industry. And, none of that's promising. So let's not take out of the equation, which I think is the most important factor. I don't see a downside in terms of the actual impacts on the people of Brigantine of having a third party. If you have a right third party, and if, as we would do, through our professionals, you're negotiating the best, tightest deal you can. It still is going to be a golf course. It still is going to be open space. It will have the capital improvements that the course needs. These are all good things. And they'll be locked in for 24 years, and if it wasn't, who comes back in? The city. And the city obviously is going to protect all those same interests to the extent it can. But you're losing or avoiding the downside risk. And it would be pretty foolish of me at this point to look at the recent trends and to look at what I know, not being any kind of golf expert, but I can see what's going on, and I listen to people and I see what they're saying and what appears to be credible, seeing where the trends are going, to say, well, I know it doesn't look good, but I think in 2016 things are going to turn around. Well, I'm not gambling with my money. If it's me and you and a couple other guys investing our money in buying the golf course or making an offer on the RFP, that's a whole different thing. I can make any crazy assumption I want, but it's not my money.
Rick, if we put everything you just said in the RFP, it'll be too big to go out. Vince, if I could ask for you to...
Phil, I'm sorry, Phil, is that really what you have to offer on this?
Thank you.
Chief insults?
If I
really,
could say
Phil?
one thing before you guys get at it. Thank you very much for answering
you.
my question. The only thing I said is people come to me with questions, and I didn't come here to attack anybody. I came here to understand. So thank you.
Hold on, Mr. Sera. I have a question as well.
Emmett?
Sarah, excuse me.
Emmett?
Mr. Sera, I did have a question. If you don't wish to answer, you don't have to, but...
This isn't cross-exam. We got to move on.
Excuse me, Phil, Rick. When Mr. Sera was here, I told him I had a question for him that seemed not to be a problem.
I think maybe you want to ask him after the meeting. We have to move on to public comment.
Let me ask a question of our city manager, Ms. Blumenthal. At the last meeting, Mr. Sera spoke about the golf course and indicated that he had read about trends
Rick,
in
this
the golf...
is the public portion.
I understand what it is, It's a follow-up to a public
Well, maybe you want to
comment.
ask it a different time. Emmett, do you want to speak, please?